Hello Fantasy Manager, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel with us, Lee and Sam from FPL Family. This is our Game Week 31 Plus. How are you feeling about the plus?
Yeah, I quite like the
plus.
plus.
I like the plus, yeah. Game Week 31 Plus Q&A session. So we have 5 questions, about 20 minutes, quick fire, which is actually quite difficult for us.
Yeah, we don't really do quick
Quite
fire.
difficult to do quick fire, but we've got 5 questions from you guys, the community. Thank you for sending those questions in. At FF Scout on Twitter and at FF Scout _, don't forget the underscore, on Instagram. So thank you for the questions. Here is the first one, Sam, coming at you right now. What would you suggest going all out on these 3 teams on a free hit in Game Week 31 Plus? And those 3 teams are Spurs, Liverpool, who are at home to Crystal Palace, potentially lifting the trophy.
No.
And Wolves. So Wolves, Spurs and Liverpool. If you're playing your free hit in 31, is it sensible to go all out on those 3?
Yeah. I mean, they seem to be the obvious picks of that game week. I mean, Spurs at home to a West Ham team who, prior to the break, had
not a lot of form going on.
Not a lot of form, not a lot of luck, really, either, with West Ham.
Luck?
Yeah, nothing seemed to really go their way. They weren't having a great time of it, were they?
Right.
And we obviously yet to see in game week 30 what kind of West Ham we're going to come back with, but on paper that seems like a good choice of fixture. Certainly Liverpool, you've already mentioned the fact that however the Merseyside derby goes will mean that this is either the game or the penultimate
I think
game.
either way, whether it is or it isn't, you've got
game.
3 Liverpool players at home to Crystal Palace and they're motivated to win the game. So
and Crystal Palace are in that mid-table. We
don't
yet know whether they are motivated, and what if they are, what are they motivated for? Because
if you were free hitting Salah, Mane, Firmino, or don't forget Trent. Yeah. Okay, Trent. Okay.
Yeah, Salah, Mane, Trent, probably, if you can budget that.
Okay.
Otherwise, one of the mids, Trent
and Wolves at home to Bournemouth as well. Nice looking fixture for Nuno Espirito Santo's boys.
Yes, absolutely. I think Wolves, they've been one of the gifts of FPL for us this season, haven't they? They've given us
a lot. Not to start with, they took ages to get going.
No, they did, but then they were playing in the Europa League and they were getting used to that kind of very quick succession of matches with a small squad. Most of the clubs that play in the Europa League and the Champions League have a much bigger squad. They can do a lot more rotating around. Wolves didn't have that. But since sort of November time, they've become really, prominent parts of most FPL teams. Lots of choice at the back with, obviously if you've got the money to spend on Doherty or one of the cheapest, Sayas, Bolly. There's loads of options there. In midfield, you've got the Traore, Moutinho boys who, both of which look good. And then of course up top you've got double trouble in Jimenez and Jota, both of which look like being really good FPL assets.
So plenty of options from Liverpool, Spurs, Wolves. Any other teams that have got good fixtures in Game Week 31? I'm thinking in particular Leicester at home to Brighton, Manchester United at home at Old Trafford against Henderson less, of course, because he can't play against his parent club, Sheffield United.
And that's really important.
2 nice fixtures there.
And when you think about how good Henderson was for Sheffield United against Aston Villa on Wednesday evening, 11 points I think he got over the course of
11
the game.
points of Henderson, yeah.
So, take that away in a side where they're already missing O'Connell, that makes them a bit defensively weaker. Now, throw against that Martial, Pogba, Rashford, Bruno, and that doesn't look.
They look exciting. They look exciting, no doubt about it. So keep an eye on those guys for your free hit, if indeed that's your strategy for Game Week 31 Plus. Question 2, Sam, from FPL Tips. Thank you, FPL Tips, for the question. Who are the cheap enablers we should be looking at? He's talking about Robinson and Davis. And Davis in particular, a very interesting pick from Aston Villa. 4.3 midfielder in FPL. So if you want a real out-of-position player, I mean, he's played up front, didn't he, for Aston Villa against Sheffield United the other night. Impressed because he was a handful for that Sheffield United centre-half pairing, but wouldn't necessarily say he threatened much. He was a handful without really threatening. But at 4.3, despite the Aston Villa fixtures, is he worth a look?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get minutes, you would think, and therefore going to bring some FPL points. And at a time where we're talking about how we don't want to burn our benches, we want them to be there because the quick succession of matches, all of that kind of stuff means that you do want people on the bench that are going to play. I would have thought he would get minutes, but honestly, I don't know. I'm still yet to be convinced that Aston Villa have that kind of bite about them going forward. Like and they need to find that now.
John McGinn might help with that and his return,
of course, and obviously there's Grealish who is the puppet master in that team for
bit
sure.
lucky to get away with a point though.
Very much so.
The young goalkeeper almost dropped it in his own net, pretty much dropped it in his own net, and the technology let him down, unfortunately, Sheffield United. One player that I thought equally was a handful for Arsenal on the same night against Manchester City was Eddie Nketiah. Now, he came in and played that forward role pretty well, I thought, for the first 20 to 25 minutes when Arsenal were in the game, before it started to go a little bit south for them, and the David Luiz thing happened. A bit unfortunate with injuries. I think Xhaka going off after 5 minutes really affected the dynamic of that midfield. I'm not quite convinced that Dani Ceballos did quite as good a job as Xhaka might have done in that game. But nevertheless, Eddie Nketiah, possibly a real cheap enabler, keeping Aubameyang out left.
Yes, and I thought he looked really promising. And, you couple with that what you've just said about the injuries and the fact that the weather was awful up in Manchester yesterday. And Arsenal had really weird travel plans to get up there.
Yeah, like 2 flights from Stansted on that night or something like that.
Didn't fly until 5 o'clock that evening. The game was at 8:15. They had to then travel back to Liverpool to get the flight home. All of that kind of, the circumstances surrounding that game, as well as the circumstances within that game, did Arsenal absolutely no favours at all. But I did think Nketiah looked promising. So if you're looking...
Will he stick with him though, Arteta?
Well, he's
against lesser opposition, he could do well. I agree, but will he stick with him?
I think he might. I mean, all of the stuff that he's been saying about the Nketiah in particular, he named him, but also about the younger, the likes of Martinelli, talking about how well they've come back into training. Why not? And
he stuck with Saka the other night. He played Willock, so maybe there's some intent there from Arteta to start blooding the youth over the rest of this season. So Nketiah potentially. If all else fails, though, surely you go back to Old Faithful, don't you? Todd Cantwell in the middle there. Norwich, some nice-looking fixtures. Fixtures that, quite frankly, they've got to win.
Yes.
They've got to win those fixtures. And the Great Escape could be on if you start to look at some of those fixtures. And, of course, you can look at Pookie up front. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a cheap enabler, but Todd Cantwell in midfield is still 4.7, right? 4.67. So he's still really good value.
I think so. And I think Todd Cantwell, of all of the cheap enablers, he is absolutely the one that I am looking at in the midfield. Like Lee says, you've got the reasonable fixtures, but you've also got this real determination to get out of trouble. Now, we're yet to see whether that determination actually manifests itself when we see them playing Gameweek 30 plus.
Well, we hope they've got determination. Certainly before the break, I don't think we saw a lot. But they've got, if Farke can get the character and the mentality right, then they have got the fixtures to get out there. I agree.
I also really like Max Aarons if you're looking for a cheap defensive enabler.
All right, Max Aarons as well. Third question from @FPL Looney Tune. Thank you for the question. Any tips on maintaining a lead in your mini league? So other than the obvious, maybe get the same big hitters as your rivals, etc. What tips on maintaining leads in mini leagues? Now listen, I am very underqualified to answer this question, but you, Sam,
the pressure.
in at 2.5k overall rank, wherever it is you are right now, you of course are top of most of the mini leagues you're in, I would suggest. Any tips for staying up there? Do you look over your shoulder? Probably not at me, but whoever's in third or second or third, looking at their strategy and who they're bringing in. Do you do that, or do you sort of play your own game?
Well, this season's a little bit odd, isn't it? Because normally by this stage we wouldn't necessarily have a clear indication of what other people's strategies are going to be. They'd kind of hold their... I'd look into the future and go, double game week, blank game week. There might be some shits coming out there, but actually you fundamentally got to make your own decision on strategy and stick by it. This season, because of the unlimited transfers and because of the hype behind the Premier League restarting, there's been a lot more chatter and a lot more honesty.
A lot more chat in the Twitter community. I love it personally, but you find it a bit of a distraction, don't you, sometimes?
I do love it because it gives you an insight into what other people are doing. There's a lot more honesty this year about this is what I'm going to do and this is the strategy that I'm going to take, because everybody's talking about it. Everyone has. So... But for me, I am firmly in I listen, but I try to ignore what everyone else is doing because I've got my strategy, and I know that in seasons gone by when I've tweaked my strategy to try to stay ahead or to catch up, it goes awry and things start to unravel. Now, I know where I'm heading. I know what my strategy is, so I'm going to stick by it. I'm going to try not to look over my shoulder. I'm not sure I agree with the getting in the same players that your rivals have, because that's going to either cost you points to make changes or it's going to upset the balance of your team. There are some really good options out there, but I think for me the key is not to not to watch one game, see one player look okay and think, right, that's the guy I'm going to go with. It's
but
kind
low
of,
risk picks as well, if you can, right?
So,
sensible FPLing, I would say. Not boring, sensible.
Sensible. Players that have got form once we've got a couple of game weeks in, but players that also, historically are good at this stage of the season, ones that come into their own towards the back end and thrive under pressure, whichever part of the pressure it is. Which also leads me to why I'm going to pick from the top and the bottom of the table, because those players that are under pressure to do well are more likely to perform in my FPL team.
All right, well, there you go. FPL Looney Tune, thank you for the question. Sensible, low risk, stick to the plan. Sounds a bit boring to me, but that's sensible FPLing for you.
That's why I'll win the mini league, and you won't.
That's why you'll be top of the league. You're absolutely right. Thank you for the question. At Trophy FPL, so question from Mo. Thank you, Mo, for the question. With Manchester City looking good, should we really be ditching their players on a wildcard? So, of course, a lot of us going into game week 30, loading up on Man City ahead of the double. Very, very nice looking double. We're halfway through it. We expect at the end of the Burnley game, the KDBs and the Agueros and the Sterlings and the Mahrezes to all just build on what happened last night at the at the Etihad against Arsenal.
Yeah.
Having said that, a lot of FPL managers will either be like me, and on the free hit, a lot of those Man City players will reverse back out. So come next game week, I won't have Aguero and Sterling. I will just have Kevin De Bruyne. But then equally, a lot of FPL managers in your position, which is, I've used the unlimited transfers to stock up on Man City. Now I'm going to wildcard out of it. How are you feeling about Mahrez and Aguero in your team then? KDB, let's assume that he's a lock, because I think given his ownership and the fact that he's just a class player, the break doesn't seem to have affected him, despite the pictures we saw on Twitter. He just come back with a bang again last night. So let's assume KDB is kind of locked in. The others, though, the periphery, the Agueros, Mahrez, Sterling, keep or sell?
Well, I think you're right what you're saying about KDB. KDB is the pinnacle of sensible FPLing. Yeah. So let's just keep him. The others, Sterling, Mahrez, Aguero, Laporte, if you went with a defensive option, for me, they're going as part of my wild card. Now, there's two reasons for it. Firstly, it's the amount of budget that they take up. So it was fine in game week 30 plus to have stocked up on 3 expensive Manchester City assets, because I also had 3 really cheap Sheffield United defenders and a couple of cheap Aston Villa assets.
Grealish, Samatta, McGinn.
Yeah, and I also had Nketiah. So it balanced out that I could have these expensive players. But actually what I'm looking to do now with my wild card is spread the wealth a little bit more, have a better blend of players across the pitch. Now, that basically means you cannot, or I cannot, even with my team's worth 105.6 mil.
Okay.
Even with that, I can't justify keeping the likes of Aguero. He's just too much money, coupled with the rotation risk. Now, we saw him come on for 10 minutes last night. That's fine in a double. He came on, did some bits in those 10 minutes. If this was a single game week and he'd come on for 10 minutes, I would be livid that I'd spent 11.8 million on him and got 10 minutes when I could spend a whole million less on somebody like Harry Kane and be guaranteed to get 90 minutes. Or I could spend less on Aubameyang and be pretty much guaranteed.
So you are going to wildcard into game week 31 plus. The wildcard is active.
Yeah.
It's active. Okay,
did it on Wednesday night.
What does your first draft front line look like then?
Kane.
Kane in?
Of course. Spurs have got nice fixtures. We're motivated. Kane's back.
Okay. Kane, I'm going to guess Jimenez.
Oh, Jimenez is going to stay. The only reason Jimenez won't stay is if we see something from Jota at Wolves, because obviously he's a lot cheaper. So if I can save some budget there, I will. But I really love Jimenez.
Jimenez is the better player.
And the consistency of Jimenez historically is better. And I'm going to go with Rashford. So I'm going to Kane, Rashford and Jimenez.
Okay, nice.
I want that front three. That's always been the goal for game week 31, and so the only way to do that is obviously to lose Aguero. That frees up some money. Also going to lose Mahrez, because I also want Bruno from Manchester United.
So you're going to double up on Bruno and Rashford. You're back in Manchester United between now and the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think next season I'll be starting with at least 2 of them.
I must admit, they look in good shape, Manchester United. I've watched a few of the training videos. I'm expecting some good things between now and the end of the season.
With our thinking on Man United, haven't we?
Haven't we just? Yeah, haven't we just? I mean, let's wait. I say let's wait and see a couple of games to see how they come back from the break. But I do think they'll hit the ground running. I do think the feel about the club is really good. What Marcus Rashford is doing off the pitch as well, I think is galvanising the whole club. And it's getting even neutrals, I was going to like myself, I'm far from neutral on Manchester United, as many of you can imagine. But even non-Manchester United fans are getting behind the Rashford thing and are going, well, fair play to the kid, fair play to Manchester United, they're doing the right thing here. So I think the feeling is good. The feeling is good around Manchester United, I agree. So, should we be ditching all the Man City players on the wildcard? Do you think, well, yeah, unless it's Kevin De Bruyne?
Yeah.
Then probably yes. So there we go, Trophy FPL. Thank you for the question. Final question comes in from @FPL Sponge. Thank you for the question. Who are the best mid-price midfielders going forward, Sam? He's talking about Grealish and Maddison and Martial. And again, we talked about Manchester United a second ago and some of their options. And I think Martial, you could probably put into that box as well as the Rashfords and the Brunos. And dare I say it, maybe even the Pogba's coming back from injury. Who knows? I'll get your view on which one of those three you might select in a second, but I've got my eye on a couple of teams that are fighting for the Champions League spots that have a wealth of options in that sort of area. One of which you'll be pleased to hear is Spurs.
Hello.
So obviously Dele Alli, probably not quite. Well, I don't think Dele Alli's quite in that mid-price bracket. But if you go down slightly from him, you've got Steven Bergwijn in at 7.4. He's only 1% owned. You've got Giovanni Lo Celso in at 7.3. He's only 0.4% owned. I think he might be coming back for an injury, so maybe don't get him in for 31, but one to look out for. And then Lucas Moura, interestingly, who we know is a relatively trustworthy FPL asset, in at 7.1, only 4.3% owned. Be interesting to see what sort of game time he gets now that Spurs and Mourinho have got more or less a far fitter squad to choose from with the likes of Son and Kane available. So of those three then, Bergwijn, Lo Celso, Moura, very briefly, which one of those do you think is the best shout out of those three?
It's Bergwijn for me.
Bergwijn, okay.
I really love Lo Celso, and once fully fit, I think he could really be outstanding. More as a Premier League asset, though, I think, than an FPL asset. But Bergwijn, I think, could be really outstanding value. I expect him to be probably priced more highly than he is now next season. So for me, it's him I'm watching. Obviously, he's going to be playing alongside the likes of Son and Kane and Dele Alli after his ban in 30.
I noticed Kane gave him a bit of a shout out, actually. I don't know whether it was on Insta or just in a press conference or something, but didn't he say he's fit and ready to go and he's looking forward to playing with, and then he shouted out a couple of players, and I'm sure Bergwijn was in there.
Yes, and I think he's not in the same way, but there's some players that really have shown some kind of real moral standing over this kind of period, and they've been doing exactly the right things. He's had a baby, he's been home, but the training and the level of kind of commitment that you've seen from him over the break, for me, puts him in really good stead. He should be fully fit and firing. Okay, all right. Well, the other team I've got my eye on is Chelsea. So Chelsea, plenty of options in that mid-price bracket if you're looking around the 6 and 7 mark. Of course, they've got Pedro in there at 6.8. He's 1.2% owned. Fancy a little bit more on the money. It's Pulisic, 6.9 million, 3.6% owned. And then Willian in at 7. He's 4% owned. I think of the three, Pulisic is the one that interests me the most in terms of explosivity, if that's the right word, explosiveness maybe. Didn't really hit the ground running in that Chelsea team, but then Frank has managed to get the best out of him after giving him that little break early on in the season. For me, I think Pulisic is one to have a look at. 6.9 between now and the end of the season. Chelsea fixtures look good. Frank's certainly building something there, and of course, they're motivated to try and get and hold on to that 4th Champions League spot. So, of the three, Pulisic for you? Yeah, and also Mount. We shouldn't forget about Mount.
Of course, Mason Mount, yeah. A bit cheaper as well than those three.
That much cheaper again. Pulisic and Mount, I feel like we've gone back to sort of October time when we were all having conversations about Pulisic.
Everyone had one of those guys, didn't we?
And then obviously there's Ruben Loftus-Cheek. So there was all of those kind of conversations about, which Chelsea...
Lots of options at Chelsea all of a sudden,
isn't there? Lots. And so that's the one thing that kind of worries me slightly about Chelsea. Some really lovely players, really good options. Almost too many players, maybe. So let's wait and see, I think, for me, who Lampard plays in 30. And then we can start thinking towards, after 31, because they've got a difficult game in 31. But from 32 onwards, we can start looking at who's had the consistent starts. All right.
Likely to be galvanised by the announcement of Timo Werner as well, coming in from Red Bull Leipzig. 45 million?
How much is he going to be in FPL
Sounds a bit cheap. How much is Timo Werner going to be in FPL, do you reckon? He's a 9-10 million, I think.
Stick him in my midfield with Bruno Fernandes next year.
I think you'll find he's going to be at forward, Timo Werner. He's going to be right up there, 9 or 10 million. Let's see. Anyway, guys, thank you for joining us in this video on the FF Scout YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining us. Leave us a like if you found the answers to the questions useful. Hopefully you did. Good luck in Game Week 31 plus. If you've not hit that subscribe button yet, we'd love you to do that. And we'll see you next time for another Sam and Lee Q&A.
Thanks, guys.
See you soon.